Bing Crosby was dying, and he did it the way he lived, with grace, a smile, and perfect timing. October 14th, 1977. Late afternoon light pours like honey across a golf course outside Madrid, the grass emerald against amber sky. He's 74 years old, wearing a cardigan despite the Spanish heat, walking the 18th hole with 3 friends. Somewhere in the clubhouse, a radio plays softly, his voice, singing about dreams. He doesn't notice, or pretends not to. His face is deeply tanned, lined by 7 decades of smiling for cameras and strangers. In his eyes, something peaceful, final. "That was a great game, fellas," he says, and his voice still carries that unmistakable warmth, that quality that once made 100 million people feel like he was singing just for them. "Let's go get a Coca-Cola." He takes one step toward the clubhouse, then another. His hand reaches out for balance, for something solid, for anything at all. His friends see his expression change. Not pain, exactly. Surprise. The recognition that something fundamental has shifted. He stumbles once, graceful even in falling, and sinks to his knees on the perfect green grass. And then Bing Crosby, the voice that comforted a world through war and depression. The man who sold more records than any human being in history. The crooner who made intimacy sound casual and perfection look effortless, lies down in the Spanish sunshine and never gets up. The applause was silent but perfect. 20 minutes later, the ambulance arrives. Too late. The doctors will say massive heart attack, instantaneous, no suffering. They will find a rosary in his jacket pocket and a handwritten note that says simply, "Pray, sing, fish." 3 words to summarize a life that defied summary. In hospitals and radio stations and living rooms around the world, when the news breaks in the middle of the night, people will stop what they're doing and feel something shift. Not just grief, though there is that, but something stranger. The loss of a voice that had been there so long it seemed permanent, like birdsong or the sound of rain. Was this the perfect exit for a man who had spent his entire life making difficult things look effortless? Or was it simply the final performance of someone who never learned to stop performing? By morning, tributes flood in from every corner of the world. Frank Sinatra, voice breaking. "He was the father of my career and everyone else's. He taught us that simplicity is the hardest art." Bob Hope, unable to continue. President Jimmy Carter calling him an American treasure. But there's something curious about the public mourning. Genuine, certainly, but also strangely muted, as if America isn't quite sure how to grieve for a man who never asked for sympathy, who presented such a flawless surface that suffering seemed impossible. The funeral is held at St. Paul the Apostle Church in Los Angeles. His widow, Catherine, his children, his famous friends, they gather to say goodbye to a man who had been, paradoxically, both omnipresent and unknowable. The priest speaks of faith and charity. What he doesn't mention are the contradictions, the shadows behind that sunny public image, the price that perfection demands. In the days that follow, as obituaries multiply, a more complicated picture begins to emerge. Stories about a demanding father, about a first marriage that ended in alcoholism and early death, about a man so uncomfortable with his own fame that he spent as much time as possible on golf courses and fishing boats, anywhere but in the spotlight he had worked so hard to achieve. The San Francisco Chronicle, October 15, 1977, confirms what the world already suspects. The voice that never wavered has finally fallen silent. But the questions remain. What does it cost a man to be America's voice of comfort for 40 years? What happens when you spend your entire life projecting warmth while maintaining such rigid control over yourself and everyone around you? And when a voice becomes synonymous with hope itself, what happens to the human being behind that voice? To understand how Bing Crosby ended up on that golf course in Madrid, we need to go back to where it all began. Not in Hollywood or even New York, but in the Pacific Northwest. where a boy named Harry Lillis Crosby learned that the key to survival might just be making people smile. He was born Harry Lillis Crosby Jr. on May 3, 1903, in Tacoma, Washington, the fourth of 7 children in a working-class Irish-American Catholic family. His father, Harry Sr., was a bookkeeper at a brewery. His mother, Catherine, was the family's emotional and spiritual center, a woman whose devout Catholicism would shape young Harry's worldview in ways that would last his entire life. The nickname Bing came early. Some say from a comic strip character called Bingo. Others claim it was local slang. Whatever its origin, the name stuck, and by the time he was 7 years old, Harry Lillis Crosby had effectively disappeared, replaced by the more casual, approachable Bing. Even his identity, it seemed, was designed to make others comfortable. Tacoma in the early 1900s was a rough port city, a place where lumber and shipping created both wealth and poverty in equal measure. The Crosbys weren't poor exactly, but money was always tight. Harry Sr. worked long hours, coming home tired and often irritable. Catherine held the family together through faith and force of will, making sure all 7 children attended Mass regularly and understood that they were part of something larger than themselves. Young Bing was not a remarkable child. He was neither particularly athletic nor academically gifted. What he had was a pleasant voice and an easy manner that made people comfortable. At St. Aloysius Church, where the family worshipped, he sang in the choir. Nothing exceptional, just a boy among boys singing hymns on Sunday mornings. But there was something in the way he sang even then that drew attention. He didn't push his voice or strain for effect. He simply opened his mouth and let the sound emerge, natural and unforced, as if singing were no different from breathing. Could anyone have predicted, watching that small boy in the church choir, that his voice would one day sell over 1 billion records? That he would become the most successful entertainer in human history? Or was it precisely because no one expected anything extraordinary from him that he learned to achieve extraordinary things without seeming to try? In 1910, the family moved to Spokane. Harry Sr. had found a better position, and the Crosbys settled into a comfortable middle-class existence. It was in Spokane that Bing's musical education truly began. He and his brother Everett would sneak into local theaters to watch vaudeville shows, studying the way performers commanded attention, the way a good song could transform a room. They bought a wind-up phonograph and collected records obsessively. Al Jolson, Irving Berlin, the popular songs of the day played over and over until they had absorbed not just the melodies but the feeling behind them. At Gonzaga High School, Bing was popular without being remarkable. He played on the baseball team, sang in school productions, and maintained decent grades without much effort. His classmates would later remember him as friendly and funny, someone who could diffuse tension with a joke or lighten the mood with a song. He was learning even then that being liked was more valuable than being admired, that making people comfortable was a kind of power. At Gonzaga University, where he enrolled to study law at his mother's insistence, Bing's real education continued outside the classroom. He and a friend, Al Rinker, formed a duo playing local clubs and parties. They weren't particularly sophisticated, mostly jazz standards and popular songs performed with more enthusiasm than polish, but audiences responded to them. There was something genuine in their performance, a sense that they were having fun rather than working. In 1925, everything changed. Al's sister Mildred Bailey, an up-and-coming singer with connections to Paul Whiteman, the most famous band leader in America, heard them perform and said, "You're wasting your time in Spokane. Come to Los Angeles." The decision to leave was easier for Bing than it should have been. He had never been passionate about law, had never really seen himself in a conventional career. His mother was devastated. She had raised her son to be respectable, to have a profession, to be safe. But there was something in Bing even then that resisted safety. Not rebellion exactly. He was too comfortable with authority for that, but a quiet conviction that his path lay elsewhere. Los Angeles in 1925 was exploding with possibility. The movie industry was transitioning to sound, radio was becoming America's primary form of entertainment, and jazz was spreading across the country like wildfire. Bing and Al Rinker arrived with $100 between them and no real plan beyond making it in show business. They lived in cheap apartments, ate cheap food, and played anywhere that would have them. When Paul Whiteman finally heard them perform, he didn't offer them a job immediately. Instead, he told them to come back in 6 months. "You've got something," he said, "but you need to find out what it is." That 6 months was crucial. And somewhere in that period, Bing made a discovery that would change popular music forever. He learned to sing into a microphone the way you would whisper to a friend. Before the microphone, singers had to project. They had to fill theaters and concert halls with their voices, which meant volume and power were everything. The great singers of the early 20th century were essentially magnificent shouters. They sang to the back row, and the result was big, dramatic, theatrical. But the microphone changed everything. Suddenly, you didn't need to project. The technology could pick up the smallest sound, the subtlest inflection. And Bing Crosby instinctively, almost accidentally, understood what this meant. You could sing as if you were alone with one person. You could be intimate, conversational, real. When Bing sang into a microphone, he didn't perform. He confided. He made every listener feel like he was singing just for them, like they were sitting together in a quiet room sharing something private. It wasn't about technique, though his technique was excellent. It was about emotional truth. When Bing sang about love or loss or longing, you believed him. In 1926, Paul Whiteman hired them as part of the Rhythm Boys. It was a start. They traveled with Whiteman's orchestra, playing theaters and dance halls across the country. And Bing kept refining his approach, kept experimenting with that intimate conversational style. But success came with complications. All three Rhythm Boys liked to drink, liked to stay out late, liked to chase women. They missed rehearsals, showed up drunk to performances, tested Whiteman's patience repeatedly. Bing was developing a reputation. Incredibly talented but difficult to manage, someone who did things his own way. In 1930, after one too many missed performances, Whiteman fired them. At 27 years old, Bing Crosby was talented, somewhat known, and completely unemployed. He could have gone back to Spokane, back to law school, back to the safe path. Instead, he went to New York alone, convinced that his voice was worth something. New York in 1930 was the center of American entertainment. Bing got a regular slot on CBS radio, 15 minutes a week, where he would sing a few songs and chat casually. It was nothing special, just another voice on the radio. Except it wasn't. Within months, Bing was receiving more fan mail than any other performer on CBS. Women wrote to say his voice made them feel less lonely. Men wrote to say they wanted to sing like him. Children requested specific songs. The network executives were baffled. He wasn't the most technically skilled singer, wasn't the most handsome, wasn't the most dramatic. But something about him connected with people in a way they had never seen before. That same year, Bing married Dixie Lee, a young actress and singer who was, by most accounts, more talented than he was. She was beautiful, vivacious, ambitious. What drew her to this casual, easygoing crooner from Spokane? Perhaps she saw behind the easy manner an ambition every bit as fierce as her own, but more carefully hidden. Bing wanted to be the biggest star in America, but he understood intuitively that in America, ambition had to look like luck. You had to make success look accidental, effortless. They had 4 sons in quick succession: Gary, twins Dennis and Philip and Lindsay. On the surface, they were the perfect American family. But behind closed doors, complications were already forming. Dixie, who had given up her own career, began drinking heavily. Bing, on the road constantly, began to see his family as something separate from his work. something he visited between tours rather than lived with. Through the 1930s, Bing's career exploded. He signed with Decca Records and began releasing hit after hit. He moved to Hollywood and began appearing in films, usually playing characters not too different from himself. Casual, charming men who solved problems with a song and a smile. The movies revealed something interesting about Bing's appeal. On camera, he was not a classically good actor. He didn't transform into different characters. He essentially played himself in every film. Relaxed, unflappable, perpetually amused by the chaos around him. But audiences loved it precisely because it seemed so natural, so effortless. In a world that was increasingly complicated and frightening, Bing Crosby represented something stable and safe. By 1940, he was the biggest star in America. His radio show had the highest ratings. His records sold millions. His movies were box office gold. He was friends with presidents and priests, equally comfortable at a formal dinner or a baseball game. He had achieved what every entertainer dreams of. He had become not just famous but beloved, woven so deeply into American culture that it was hard to imagine life without him. Could anyone maintain that level of success, that degree of public affection, without paying some kind of price? Could you be America's voice of comfort without losing something essential about yourself in the process? In 1942, Irving Berlin wrote a song for the movie Holiday Inn. It told a simple story. A man far from home, dreaming of snow and familiar comforts. The melody was simple. The lyrics were sentimental without being saccharine, and Bing was asked to record it. The recording session was unremarkable. Studio C at Decca Records in Los Angeles, May 29, 1942. Hot afternoon, windows open, street noise filtering in. Bing stood at the microphone in shirt sleeves, script in hand. He sang the song through once, maybe twice. The engineers asked for another take. Bing shrugged, lit a cigarette, sang it again. 18 minutes total. Then he went to play golf. No one in that room knew they had just recorded the most important song in American popular music history. No one suspected that this simple melody about snow and nostalgia would become something sacred. The song was called White Christmas. It was released in July 1942, 7 months after Pearl Harbor. America was at war, and millions of young men were far from home for the first time in their lives, facing horrors they could barely comprehend. The song caught something in the air, some collective longing that people hadn't known how to articulate. Then came Christmas Eve 1942. Armed Forces Radio broadcast a special program for troops overseas. They played various holiday songs, messages from home, greetings from celebrities. And then, at midnight Greenwich Mean Time, they played Bing Crosby singing about snow and sleigh bells and days that were merry and bright. In military camps across Europe, North Africa, and the Pacific, men stopped what they were doing. In mess halls and barracks and foxholes, soldiers fell silent. Some of them were teenagers who had never been away from home before. Some of them were fathers who didn't know if their children would remember them. Some of them would be dead within weeks. And Bing's voice, that impossibly warm, impossibly steady voice, told them that somewhere, somehow, home still existed. Men who hadn't cried since childhood wept openly. The broadcast ended. For a moment, absolute silence. Then the requests began pouring in from every base, every ship, every outpost where American soldiers waited in the dark. Play it again. Please, God, play it again. The voice that comforted a world. What they heard wasn't just a song about Christmas, it was a promise, a belief. The idea that beyond the war, beyond the fear and death and chaos, normal life continued. That somewhere it was still snowing peacefully. That they would go home. That home would still be there when they arrived. And Bing's voice made them believe it was true. Back in Los Angeles, Bing didn't know any of this yet. He was at home with Dixie and the boys, probably playing golf earlier that day, probably having dinner with friends. just another Christmas. The song was doing well on the radio, sure, but it was just another hit in a career full of hits. He couldn't have known that he had just given millions of terrified people the only gift that mattered: hope. In the months that followed, White Christmas became a phenomenon unlike anything anyone had seen before. It sold millions of copies. It was played on every radio station, requested at every dance, sung by every amateur in every bar. It climbed to #1 and stayed there. It won the Academy Award for Best Original Song. It became, almost overnight, not just Bing's signature tune, but something larger. A cultural artifact, a secular hymn, the sound of longing itself. 50 million copies sold. The best-selling single in recorded music history. A record it still holds today, nearly 80 years later. Every Christmas since 1942, that voice, impossibly young on those old recordings, impossibly warm, reminds us of something we've lost or perhaps never had, or maybe only imagined we once knew. But there's a cost to becoming a symbol. There's a price to being everyone's source of comfort. In 1944, Bing starred in Going My Way, playing Father O'Malley, a young priest who uses music and humor to revitalize a struggling parish. It was the role he was born to play, or rather the role that crystallized what audiences already believed about him. Father O'Malley was warm but never sentimental, devout but never preachy, someone who could connect with young delinquents and old nuns with equal ease. He was, in other words, Bing Crosby in a collar. The movie was a massive hit, and Bing won the Academy Award for Best Actor. At the ceremony accepting his Oscar, he gave a typically self-deprecating speech. "Like the church said, I got the part," he joked, "and some of us are just lucky." It was vintage Bing, turning what should have been a moment of triumph into something casual and light. But behind the humor was a truth. Bing understood that his appeal rested on seeming like he wasn't trying, like success just happened to him through no particular effort of his own. The sequel, The Bells of St. Mary's, was even more successful. Bing and Ingrid Bergman had a chemistry that was palpable but never inappropriate, perfect for a priest and a nun who clearly care for each other but remain bound by their vows. The film captured something essential about Bing's appeal. He made virtue seem easy, made goodness seem natural. In his presence, being a decent person didn't look like a struggle. It looked like the most normal thing in the world. But while Bing was playing saints on screen, his home life was becoming increasingly troubled. Dixie's drinking had progressed from heavy to alcoholic. She was hospitalized multiple times, sent to various treatment facilities, always released with promises she couldn't keep. Bing dealt with this the way he dealt with everything uncomfortable, by not dealing with it at all. He worked more, traveled more, spent less time at home. When he was there, he maintained rigid control over his sons, demanding perfect behavior and punishing any deviation harshly. You gave them comfort, Bing, but did you ever take any for yourself? The question would hang, unanswered, through decades of smiles and songs. What happens when you spend your entire life projecting ease and warmth to millions of strangers, then come home and find that your own family is messy and complicated and human? Do you try to bring that same warmth home? Or do you separate the two completely, reserving your best self for the public and leaving your family with whatever's left? Through the 1950s, Bing remained hugely successful, but the nature of entertainment was changing. Television was replacing radio. Rock and roll was replacing the smooth crooning style that Bing had pioneered. Younger audiences saw him as their parents' music, something safe and old-fashioned. Frank Sinatra had reinvented himself as a swinging, dangerous figure. Elvis Presley was scandalizing America with his hips, and Bing Crosby, the biggest star in the world, was starting to seem like a relic from another era. He handled this with typical grace. He didn't try to compete with the rock and rollers, didn't attempt to update his image. Instead, he leaned into his role as America's comfortable uncle, doing television specials with his family, hosting variety shows, being exactly who he had always been. If the culture was moving past him, so be it. He had achieved everything there was to achieve. In 1952, Dixie Lee died of ovarian cancer. She was only 40. The official tributes praised her as a devoted wife and mother. The truth was more complicated. She had struggled with alcoholism for years, had been unhappy in ways that no one acknowledged publicly. Bing mourned her in his private, controlled way, going to Mass every day, saying the rosary, never speaking publicly about his grief. 3 years later, he married Catherine Grant, an actress 30 years his junior. The marriage raised eyebrows, but Catherine brought something into Bing's life that had been missing: genuine partnership. She was strong-willed and independent, not willing to simply fade into the background. They had 3 children together, and by all accounts, Bing was a different father this second time around. Older, softer, more present. Did he regret the way he had raised his first 4 sons? Did he see the second chance for what it was? Or did he simply do what he had always done? Move forward, keep working, maintain the image of the man who never struggled. Through the 1960s and 70s, Bing became something like a living monument. He was no longer the biggest star. That era had passed. But he was respected, beloved, treated as a link to a golden age of American entertainment. He did Christmas specials every year, always ending with the song, White Christmas. Each time he sang it, something in his voice had changed. The youthful smoothness was gone, replaced by something rougher, more worn. But there was also something in this older version that the young Bing's recording lacked, a kind of earned wisdom, a recognition of loss that made the longing for home even more poignant. He wasn't promising that everything would be okay anymore. He was admitting that some things are lost forever and singing about them anyway. He invested wisely, in oil, in real estate, in various businesses, and became very wealthy, though he still lived relatively modestly. He spent more and more time on golf courses and fishing boats, places where he could be anonymous, where he didn't have to be Bing Crosby the legend. Just Bing, an old man with a good swing and a patient temperament. In his final interview, conducted just months before his death, a journalist asked him if he had any regrets. Bing thought about it for a long moment. "I wish I'd been around more for my first family," he finally said. "But I was young and stupid and thought work was everything. You learn, but sometimes you learn too late." It was the most honest thing he had ever said publicly. And even then he softened it with a joke. "But hell, at least I gave them the song. That's got to count for something, right?" On that golf course in Madrid, in those final moments before his heart stopped, what did Bing Crosby think about? Did he review his life, tallying successes and failures? Did he think about his sons, both the living and the dead? Dennis and Lindsay would both die by suicide in the 1990s, carrying wounds that perhaps began in their father's house. Did he think about the billions of people who had found comfort in his voice, who had been made to feel less alone by his songs? Or did he simply experience what he had always projected? Ease, contentment, the sense that everything had worked out exactly as it should. "That was a great game, fellas. Let's go get a Coca-Cola." Perfect last words for a man who had spent his entire life making difficult things look easy. The funeral attracted thousands. Presidents and paupers, fellow entertainers, and ordinary fans who felt they had lost someone personally important. The eulogy spoke of his faith, his charity, his contributions to American culture. But it missed something essential. The loneliness of being loved by millions who didn't really know you, the exhaustion of maintaining perfection for 60 years, the strange isolation that comes from being everyone's source of comfort while carrying your own burdens alone. In the years since his death, Bing Crosby's reputation has been complicated by revelations about his private life. In 1983, his son Gary published Going My Own Way, a memoir that portrayed Bing as a cruel and abusive father. someone who beat his children and created an atmosphere of constant fear. Other family members disputed this account, saying Gary exaggerated. But even those who defended Bing acknowledged that he was a strict disciplinarian, someone who expected his children to be as controlled and perfect as he appeared to be in public. The voice that comforted a world. But who comforted the voice? The man who had seemed so simple, so easy to understand, turned out to be as complex and contradictory as anyone else. The gap between his public warmth and private coldness forced America to reckon with something uncomfortable. That the people we ask to comfort us are not themselves immune to pain. That perfection is often a mask for damage, that the voice singing about home might belong to someone who never felt at home anywhere. But here's what remains undeniable. When Bing Crosby sang, something happened that transcended technique or talent. He made people feel safe. In the middle of the Depression, he made them believe prosperity would return. In the middle of the war, he made them believe they would survive. In the chaos of rapid social change, he made them believe that some things would remain constant. Whether he believed these things himself is almost beside the point. He gave that gift to others, and they loved him for it. Was it worth it, that exchange? Giving the world comfort while denying yourself the messy authenticity of real human connection? Being loved by millions who only knew your public face while your own children felt like strangers? These are questions without easy answers. Today, over 40 years after his death, Bing Crosby's music continues to sell. White Christmas is played millions of times every December. His films are rediscovered by new generations. His influence on popular music is acknowledged by everyone from Frank Sinatra to Tony Bennett to Michael Bublé. He changed the way singers approached a microphone, changed the way intimacy could be conveyed through technology, changed what it meant to be a star. There's a recording that exists, never commercially released, of Bing singing the song in his final years. His voice is older, rougher, the smoothness worn away by decades of cigarettes and age. But there's something in this version that the young Bing's recording lacked, a kind of earned wisdom, a recognition of loss that makes the longing even more poignant. He's not promising that everything will be okay anymore. He's admitting that some things are lost forever and singing about them anyway. That might be the most honest version of Bing Crosby. The one he never showed the public. The one who understood that comfort is sometimes a lie we tell each other because the truth is unbearable. He spent his life providing that comfort, and maybe that was enough. Maybe it had to be. If a voice can comfort a world but not the man who owns it, whose comfort matters more. If perfection is possible only through rigid control, is it still worth achieving? If perfection means silencing pain, then what do we lose when the music stops? Bing Crosby lived two lives, the public one, where everything was easy and warm and right, and the private one, about which we know far less but can guess enough. The public life gave joy to hundreds of millions of people. The private life was complicated, painful, marked by failures and regrets. Which one was more real? Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. Perhaps the truth is that we are all performing for someone, all trying to project something better than what we feel. And Bing Crosby was simply better at it than most. On that golf course in Madrid, in those final perfect seconds before everything stopped, maybe Bing Crosby finally achieved what he had been working toward his entire life, a moment of pure, uncomplicated ease. No cameras, no microphones, no expectations. Just an old man finishing a game, about to get a Coca-Cola with friends, happy in the simplest possible way. The voice that comforted a world. His gravestone says in Holy Cross Cemetery, Culver City. But maybe the real story is simpler and sadder than that. A boy from Tacoma who learned to sing so beautifully that everyone forgot he was human too. He gave us comfort, and we loved him for it, and perhaps that was all he could give. Perhaps it was more than enough. Perhaps it was everything. And every Christmas when that voice, impossibly young, impossibly warm, impossibly perfect. Asks if our days are merry and bright. We answer yes, even when they're not. Because that's what Bing Crosby taught us. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is lie beautifully, sing sweetly, make people believe that somewhere, somehow, everything is going to be just fine, even when you know it's not true, especially then. The voice that comforted a world. But who comforted the voice?